The first great crisis, or at any rate, controversy of American foreign policy is what to do about the French Revolution. And in 1789, the year George Washington took office as the first president, a Paris mob, or justified outraged protesters, depending on your point of view, stormed a hated prison in Paris called the Bastille, touching off the French Revolution, whose effects were long-lasting. Within a few years, the King Louis XVI, and his bride, Marie Antoinette, and their young son were all killed. And a revolutionary government had taken power in France. Now, the reason this was controversial was really twofold. The first is more philosophic. That is to say, there was a dispute among the founders, or the entire population of America at the time, which went something like this. We, the Americans, declared our independence from a king on the basis of God-given natural rights. Well, the French have just overthrown a king in the name of liberté, égalité, and fraternité, liberty, equality, fraternity, very similar principles to our own. Are we not then obligated to help the revolutionaries? And the second question revolved around a treaty that the United States signed with France in the Revolutionary War. Remember that France gave considerable aid to America during that war, arguably without which the revolution would not have succeeded. So what were the obligations of the United States under that treaty? And this was an especially complicated question, because before long, the revolutionary government in France was at war with other countries in Europe, especially England. Now, given the terms of the treaty, did that mean that the United States was obligated to support France in this new war? And then another thorny question this raised is, well, when we made a treaty with France, we made a treaty with the king, King Louis XVI. That doesn't mean we're then obligated to support a French government, the same French government that cut off that king's head. This is not the same government we made a deal with. It's in fact the opposite of it. It's its enemy. And this question swirled throughout America, certainly among American elites concerned about foreign affairs during this period, and especially Alexander Hamilton, who insisted that we should do nothing. In fact, Hamilton said that if, as a principled matter, the United States were to take up the policy that any government that declares the principles of the Declaration of Independence or something like them to be the only legitimate form of government, and not just any government, that if any revolutionary movement were to declare that those are the only legitimate principles, and that we are therefore obligated to support such movements, we're essentially declaring war with all the governments of the world, since there really are almost none that are based on our system of government. And it would be ridiculously foolhardy for us as a young country to declare war against the rest of the world. And in fact, he would say beyond merely being a young and weak country, it would simply be foolish because even the strongest country can't be at war with the whole world, and it violates our principle of non-interference. So this debate, as I said, really roiled the early republic. It becomes especially important in 1793 in the crisis over the so-called Neutrality Proclamation. Now, at this time, Washington is the president, Thomas Jefferson is still the Secretary of State, and Alexander Hamilton is still the Secretary of the Treasury. On Hamilton's advice, the Washington administration issues a proclamation saying that they're not going to take sides in the budding conflict between revolutionary France and the rest of Europe. Now, this angers some people, and it leads to a fairly memorable event, which is amusing to think about in the present context. What happens is that Hamilton, writing under a pseudonym, gets into a pamphlet war with Madison, also writing under a pseudonym. And everyone knew that Madison was writing on behalf of Jefferson. These kinds of things don't happen anymore, but they were common in the early republic. Now, the debate over the Neutrality Proclamation was primarily a debate over presidential powers. That is to say, it was a debate about constitutional principle in a way more than it was a debate about foreign policy. But the foreign policy question was still important. What is the United States obligated to do, both in terms of upholding its own principles overseas in other countries, and what do treaty obligations require of us, right? It was clearly not in the U.S. interest, Hamilton, I think, had this exactly right, for the United States to get involved in the fight between France and England, or France and the rest of non-revolutionary Europe. It would have been expensive. It would have been time-consuming. It could have been bloody. It was logistically very complicated. But is there something hypocritical about declaring all men to be created equal and saying this is a universal principle, and then when others declare the same thing, sort of washing your hands and saying, I have nothing to do with that? Well, a lot of people at the time in the country felt that way, including some very, very prominent and influential people. At the end of the day, the United States did not get involved in the French Revolutionary Wars. And it's arguable, and historians still debate this question, whether the United States did not get involved out of principle or because it simply was too poor and too weak anyway. So even had it wanted to, it couldn't have. But this issue doesn't go away. And in fact, this whole question of what do our principles, as enunciated in the Declaration of Independence, require of us on the international stage, has been with us since the beginning of the Republic, is with us now, and has one way or the other determined or influenced foreign policy decisions throughout the life of the country.